The moment I stepped onto the gleaming platform of the Galactic Chef Academy, I realized that Earth kitchens had nothing on this place. Metallic surfaces shimmered with iridescent hues that changed depending on your angle, and every utensil seemed to float slightly above the countertops, rotating lazily as if they had their own personality. I tried to steady my heartbeat as a group of alien students turned to watch me, their multi-limbed forms leaning curiously over their cooking stations. Some had translucent skin that glowed softly, others sported tentacles that twitched with nervous excitement. I swallowed and reminded myself that this was an internship, an opportunity of a lifetime. I had been warned that humans were rare here, almost exotic, and I suspected I'd become a walking science experiment the moment I arrived. "Welcome, human intern," said a voice that made me jump. A tall alien with 3 eyes, each blinking at a slightly different rhythm, extended a limb that could only loosely be described as a handshake. I hesitated, shaking it, and felt a jolt, not unpleasant but enough to make me flinch. Around me, alien students giggled, or whatever their equivalent of giggling was, and I had the distinct impression that my every move was being analyzed. I was led to the back of the academy, past shelves stacked with ingredients that seemed to defy known physics. Floating jars of liquids shimmered like molten rainbows, powders sparkled with microscopic motes of light, and fruits hovered in midair, as though protesting gravity. My guide, the alien food vendor I'd heard whispered about, was flamboyant in every sense, tentacles tipped with brushes, glimmering scales, and an aura of mischievous energy that seemed almost tangible. "Ah, human," he said, eyes twinkling. "We have a secret menu, of course, but only for those qualified to taste it. You, my curious friend, might just survive the first round." I blinked, unsure if he was serious. Secret menu? Humans qualified? Before I could ask, he waved a tentacle, and a small plate floated toward me. It emitted a faint warmth and an intoxicating aroma, neither familiar nor offensive, but compelling in a way that tugged at more than just my hunger. I lifted a fork, hesitated, and then tasted it. The first bite hit my tongue like a playful electric shock. Heat spread through my body, my heartbeat spiked, and my senses sharpened in ways I hadn't known possible. My stomach fluttered, my palms grew clammy, and I felt alert. Alert, and aware, and suddenly very conscious of how close my elbow was to a tentacle brushing past my workstation. I coughed slightly, attempting to maintain composure, but my mind was buzzing with the dish's unexpected effects. Around me, alien students observed with fascination. One leaned forward with a look that I could only interpret as interest, another tilted its head in curiosity, and a few whispered among themselves in tones that I assumed meant they were judging my reactions. My attempts to remain professional only drew more attention, each flinch or blush apparently a signal, a secret code in this alien courtship language I had yet to decipher. I tried to take another bite, reasoning that if I behaved like nothing was happening, perhaps I could maintain dignity. That was a mistake. The second bite was worse, or better, depending on perspective. A sudden warmth coursed through my chest, a tingling heat spread across my face, and I felt a sort of compulsion to respond to every glance, every gesture, every flick of an alien limb near me. My brain tried to rationalize it. It's the food, just the food, nothing more. But my body had other plans. The vendor watched me with an amused tilt of his head. "You are reacting exactly as predicted," he said. His tentacles gestured theatrically at the ingredients around me, some spinning like tops, others puffing tiny clouds of scented vapor. "Humans are so delightfully simple when faced with a properly prepared dish." I swallowed hard, aware that my breathing was shallow and my focus fraying. I tried to step back, to give myself a moment of control, but the kitchen itself seemed to conspire against me. A floating whisk brushed against my forearm, leaving a slight shiver in its wake. Steam rose from a pot, curling around my shoulders, making my skin prickle. Each tiny interaction felt amplified, exaggerated, as if the secret menu had tuned the entire room to a frequency of heightened sensation. And then there was the smell. Not just the smell, but the layered aromas twisting in ways I couldn't identify, sweet, savory, pungent, and something subtly suggestive, teasing the edges of curiosity I didn't even know I had. I realized then that tasting the secret menu was less about flavor and more about experiencing the dish as a full-body event. My thoughts scattered between culinary analysis and, well, everything else. Somewhere in the haze, I became aware of the alien students leaning closer, interpreting every bite, every shiver, as an invitation. My brain screamed to maintain composure, to act like a professional in turn, but my body was betraying me, reacting eagerly to the invisible cues of the kitchen, the vendor, and possibly the menu itself. I had no idea where this was going, only that I was utterly, hopelessly, uncomfortably, and hilariously caught in the effects of the first taste. By the time the plate was empty, I was breathless, flushed, and acutely aware of just how much attention I was attracting. The vendor's eyes twinkled knowingly, and I realized that my internship had just begun, and that surviving it would require equal measures of courage, self-control, and a sense of humor I wasn't sure I fully possessed. By the second week, I was more or less a regular in the alien kitchen, though the term, regular, felt generous given the constant state of embarrassment I lived in. Each day, the vendor offered a new dish from the secret menu, and each bite seemed designed to push me further down the rabbit hole of hot, very willing chaos. My senses were on edge, my reactions amplified beyond reason, and I had started to suspect that the aliens were deliberately enjoying my discomfort. I tried to approach my station with cautious professionalism, adjusting my gloves and mentally rehearsing human composure. That lasted exactly 30 seconds before the first dish arrived, a small orb that pulsed gently in my hand, warm and emitting a faint, sweet scent that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I inhaled cautiously, attempting to evaluate its aroma, and immediately felt the familiar tingle travel through my chest and limbs. My face warmed involuntarily, and I realized too late that my posture had become suggestive, somehow. A nearby alien student tilted its head, one long appendage lazily hovering near my elbow, and I could swear I felt it smile. The first taste made me internally scream in both delight and horror. My senses sharpened, and suddenly every motion in the kitchen was hyper-aware. Floating spoons shimmered as they moved, tiny sparks of seasoning drifted through the air like fireflies, and the heat radiating from the orb seemed to resonate directly with my own pulse. I tried to make a note in my journal, something logical about flavor profiles, but my pen shook violently in my hand. Every glance from an alien classmate felt like a deliberate test, every brush of tentacle near my workstation a challenge I was wildly unprepared for. The vendor hovered nearby, tentacles swirling as though orchestrating the chaos. "Ah, yes," he said, voice dripping amusement. "You are responding as expected. Humans are wonderfully predictable when faced with the proper culinary stimulus." I flushed even harder, which only drew more attention. One of the floating jars of sauce tipped slightly as if to watch me more closely, and I realized that everything in this kitchen, even inanimate objects, seemed designed to tease, to provoke, to test. Trying to maintain composure, I reached for another bite, but the alien student next to me misinterpreted my movement entirely. Its tentacle brushed my hand. Accidentally, or so it claimed, but I felt a jolt run through my entire body. My brain argued with itself. "It's just touch, stay professional, act normal," while every nerve screamed in rebellion. I caught myself leaning back, only to bump into another floating dish, sending a glowing sauce spiraling in my direction. The sauce landed with a soft sizzle, draping my forearm in sticky warmth. The alien beside me let out a delighted trill, clearly interpreting my flustered reaction as a bold invitation. By this point, I was acutely aware that my human attempts at modesty were utterly futile. Each dish seemed to amplify not only my physiological reactions but my social awkwardness. When I tried to stir a pot, my hands lingered a moment too long near an alien tentacle offering guidance, sending both of us into an awkward mini-dance of floating ingredients and flustered gestures. I could feel my face heating again, my breaths growing shallow, and my mind buzzing with a cocktail of culinary analysis, embarrassment, and something more, forbiddingly pleasurable. And then came the sous chef, the one alien whose attention made my heart skip in a way I couldn't entirely blame on the food. He was sleek, with bioluminescent markings that pulsed softly along his limbs, and a quiet confidence that made his every motion hypnotic. He offered advice with a casual touch, guiding my hand over ingredients, leaning in to explain textures and flavors, and every time he did, my pulse spiked embarrassingly. It was impossible to tell if my reactions were genuine or induced by the menu, and I suspected that he didn't care either way. The day devolved into a series of escalating misadventures. One dish made me attempt to rearrange utensils for better efficiency, which somehow looked like I was practicing some alien form of seduction. Another sent me slipping slightly on a slick patch of spilled liquid, flailing hands brushing against tentacles and floating tools in a blur of glowing chaos. I tried to stifle laughter, but the mixture of heat, sensory overload, and alien amusement made it impossible. Each incident drew more students closer, all observing, whispering, or mimicking my reactions for their own entertainment. Even small tasks like tasting sauces became a trial of self-control. The secret menu was insidious. Each bite amplified warmth, desire, and awareness. A gentle puff of aromatic steam made me inhale sharply, unintentionally leaning into the nearest alien's guidance. My mind protested, my body betrayed, and somewhere in the haze I realized that subtle flirtation had become a survival tactic as much as a side effect. By the end of the session, I was sticky with sauce, flushed from head to toe, and acutely aware that my every move had been watched and interpreted in ways I couldn't have imagined. The vendor clapped his tentacles together, eyes twinkling with delight. "Excellent! You are mastering the art of the human response quite beautifully. Tomorrow, we escalate." As I stumbled to a corner to collect myself, I realized that the secret menu was more than a culinary challenge. It was a lesson in chaos, comedy, and attraction. I had survived the day, technically, but the knowledge that the next dish would push me further kept me both terrified and strangely eager. The morning of the secret menu showcase arrived like a whirlwind of panic and excitement. I barely slept, running mental checklists of ingredients, techniques, and most importantly, how not to completely humiliate myself in front of an audience of aliens who seemed to have a sixth sense for misreading human gestures. I had been warned that this final task was both a test of skill and stamina, but I wasn't prepared for just how interactive this secret menu would make me feel. My pulse raced the moment I set foot in the kitchen, my hands already tingling from residual reactions of the previous day's tasting. Every scent, every shimmer of ingredient, seemed to amplify my awareness, making it nearly impossible to maintain professional composure. I began prepping my dish, a complex combination of flavors and textures I had painstakingly planned over the past week. Floating fruits hovered near my workstation, waiting to be sliced with surgical precision, while sauces drifted around like colorful ribbons in the air. My hands were shaking slightly as I measured spices, aware that even the tiniest mistake could cause a chain reaction in this hyper-responsive environment. One bite, one accidental inhale of a fragrant mist, and I was reminded just how powerful the secret menu truly was. My cheeks flushed, my stomach fluttered, and I caught myself leaning a little too close to the tentacle hovering near my arm for guidance. Of course, chaos began almost immediately. A misjudged sprinkle of spice floated into the air and landed directly on my forearm, warming my skin in a way that made me flinch and giggle, louder than I intended. The alien student next to me interpreted it as an invitation and leaned closer with a mischievous glint in their eye. I tried to step back, only to bump into another floating dish, sending a glob of glowing sauce flying across the workstation. My hands instinctively went up to catch it, brushing against the sous chef's guiding tentacle in a moment of accidental intimacy. I froze, heart hammering, while he gave me the smallest, most knowing smirk, clearly aware of exactly what had just happened. The rest of the kitchen seemed to sense my vulnerability and decided to exploit it. A floating whisk spun into my line of motion, forcing me to twist unnaturally to avoid collision. In the process, my elbow nudged a delicate stack of translucent pastry layers, sending them wobbling dangerously. I reached to stabilize them, accidentally pressing my hands against the sous chef's for a split second, and felt an electric jolt of sensation that made me gasp audibly. Every flinch, every shiver, was being observed and interpreted, and I realized that my human attempts at restraint were hopelessly failing. Even my ingredients seemed to conspire against me. Tiny bursts of scented steam wafted in my direction, making my mind cloud with heat and desire, while floating spices hovered temptingly just out of reach, demanding interaction. I tried to remind myself that I was here to cook, not to participate in some alien flirtation experiment, but my body clearly had its own agenda. My hands trembled as I plated my dish, arranging each element with exaggerated care, hyper-aware of every brush of alien appendage nearby. The sous chef leaned in again to offer guidance, his proximity making my pulse spike once more, and for the first time, I wondered if the menu was even necessary for my reactions. Then came the disaster. One of the floating sauce jars toppled, spilling a river of glowing liquid across my station. I lunged to contain it, only to slip on the slick surface, sliding headlong into a stack of shimmering ingredients. My arms flailed, catching floating fruits, stirring spoons, and, inevitably, the sous chef's tentacle. The collision sent sparks of seasoning into the air, a cloud of glowing powder enveloping both of us, leaving me coughing and laughing uncontrollably. The rest of the kitchen erupted in giggles and squeals of delight, clearly entertained by my human clumsiness. I could feel my body responding far too eagerly to the chaotic mixture of heat, touch, and aromas, and I realized that the line between embarrassment and exhilaration had entirely blurred. Somehow, I managed to stand, dripping with sauce and shimmering powder, attempting to salvage my dish. The sous chef guided my hands with gentle precision, his touch careful but undeniably intimate. Every accidental brush, every moment of shared effort, made my pulse race and my mind spin. I caught fleeting glimpses of amusement and admiration in his eyes, and I had to admit to myself that my feelings were no longer entirely influenced by the menu. Somewhere between the floating ingredients, glowing sauces, and chaos of the kitchen, I had begun to genuinely enjoy his attention. By the time I finally finished plating, my dish looked like a masterpiece despite the surrounding chaos. The floating sauces had settled, the pastries were stabilized, and the kitchen had begun to calm down. I was sticky, flushed, and completely aware that the sous chef was watching me with a mixture of pride, amusement, and something warmer that made my chest thrum. I realized then that the secret menu had not just tested my tolerance for embarrassment and sensory overload. It had forced me to let go of rigid human pride and embrace the unpredictable, playful world of alien cooking. As the vendor clapped his tentacles together in approval, I felt a strange combination of relief and anticipation. I had survived the culinary chaos, proven myself in the kitchen, and perhaps, just perhaps, discovered something about myself along the way. My human instincts screamed caution, but my heart and body were now irreversibly tangled in the warm, teasing energy of the kitchen, and the subtle, undeniable attention of the sous chef. By the time the final tasting began, I was both exhausted and exhilarated. The kitchen had transformed into a vibrant stage of glowing ingredients, floating utensils, and a constant buzz of alien energy. My hands still trembled slightly from the previous chaos, but I had learned to channel that energy into careful, deliberate movements. Every dish I prepared was more than just food, it was a performance, a playful negotiation between the menu's mischievous effects and my own growing confidence. The sous chef hovered nearby, offering subtle guidance and flashes of his mischievous smile, and I felt a thrill each time our hands brushed or our movements synchronized. The first bite of my dish for the showcase caused an immediate reaction, but this time I was prepared. Instead of panicking, I let the warmth spread through me, allowing myself to enjoy the sensations without losing control. The flavors were complex, teasing, and indulgent, just like the rest of the secret menu, but now I could focus on presentation, timing, and interaction rather than flailing under its influence. The sous chef leaned in to taste alongside me, his bioluminescent markings pulsing faintly with amusement, and our shared reaction sparked a moment of silent, mutual acknowledgement. It was playful, electric, and far too intimate for a simple culinary critique, and I realized that my own excitement was no longer entirely menu-induced. The other students crowded around, whispering and pointing, but I no longer felt self-conscious. I had learned to navigate their teasing, their curious glances, and the exaggerated effects of the secret menu with a mixture of humor and strategy. One particularly bold student floated too close, attempting a mischievous gesture with a floating spoon, and I dodged it gracefully, only to have the sous chef subtly guide me back into alignment. The brief touch sent another shiver through me, and I caught myself laughing, genuinely amused at the absurdity of it all. The kitchen was a madhouse of floating sauces, glowing fruits, and sparks of seasoning, yet I felt completely at home in the chaos. As the vendor circled the room, clapping his tentacles in delight, I realized that the secret menu was no longer a challenge to resist. It was a playful partner in the comedy of our interactions. Each dish, each reaction, each accidental brush of hands or tentacles had become part of a dance, and I found myself moving through it with confidence and even a little flair. I could see the amusement and pride in the eyes of the sous chef, and I felt a warm surge of something more, something that wasn't simply induced by taste or scent, but by connection, shared effort, and undeniable chemistry. Finally, the tasting concluded. My dish had been well received, not only for its flavors but for the performance I had delivered amidst chaos. The vendor's voice rang out, full of theatrical flair, praising my courage, creativity, and mastery of human reactions. My body buzzed from the lingering effects of the secret menu, but I felt a sense of triumph I had never expected. I had survived, I had succeeded, and I had discovered a way to embrace the unpredictability of this alien culinary world without losing my own sense of self. The sous chef stepped closer, and for the first time, I let myself fully acknowledge the warmth between us. His touch was gentle but deliberate as he guided my hand to examine a floating ingredient, and I felt the thrill of contact without embarrassment or panic. There was a silent understanding in the air, a playful acknowledgement of everything we had experienced together in the kitchen. I smiled, feeling my cheeks warm for entirely different reasons than before, and he returned the gesture with a subtle, teasing tilt of his head. As the other students and floating kitchen tools gradually returned to order, I realized that I had been changed by the experience. The secret menu had challenged me, humiliated me, delighted me, and ultimately guided me toward a deeper understanding of myself and the strange, chaotic world I had temporarily joined. I had learned to laugh at my reactions, to embrace the ridiculousness of alien culinary culture, and to appreciate the unexpected thrill of connection in the most unconventional ways. The vendor winked at me as he passed by, whispering, "The menu is endless, and so are the possibilities, human. You may have mastered this course, but the adventure has only just begun." I glanced at the sous chef, whose expression mirrored my own combination of mischief, relief, and something warmer. In that moment, amid floating ingredients, glowing sauces, and lingering effects of the secret menu, I realized that I had found more than an internship. I had found laughter, connection, and perhaps even a touch of romance in the most unlikely, chaotic, and utterly delightful setting imaginable. For the first time since stepping into this alien kitchen, I felt entirely at ease, ready to embrace whatever came next with humor, curiosity, and a willingness that extended far beyond the secret menu. The chaos was no longer intimidating, it was exhilarating. The kitchen, the menu, the aliens, and the playful connection I shared with the sous chef had become a world I could navigate with confidence, laughter, and unexpected joy. I took a deep breath, savoring the lingering warmth and the subtle thrill of possibility, and smiled at the knowledge that this was only the beginning.